Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to 10 Seconds to Air. I'm Alita Guillen. Today's guest did something many of us would love to do. They quit their cushy job and drove cross-country for over a year. However, their idea wasn't to see Yellowstone or visit Mount Rushmore. It was to go to places where the people and the culture were vastly different from them. Among other things, they wanted to know what was driving hate and fear in politics. It was a research project driven by curiosity. Scott Shigeoka is a speaker, author, lecturer, and creative consultant. He is known globally as a curiosity expert. He is a fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center and teaches at the University of Texas, Austin. His journey cross-country is captured in his new book called Seek: How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. Scott joins me now to talk about his research and share how and why we should be more curious. Here now is Scott. Hi, Scott. How are you?
Hi, I'm so excited to be on the air. I'm a fellow listener, so it's great to be on the other side.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for joining me, sharing your journey here. I can't wait to dive in on this very unconventional road trip. How long were you actually on the road?
It was about 13 months, yeah. And it was right, I mean, it would have been 2 years, but then, we started getting the initial news about COVID. And I was like, I think I should probably head on back to the Bay Area, which is where I set off from.
Okay.
So, yeah, so about 13 months.
About 13 months. And I would bet, I know it's now been a little while since then, but I bet you continue to kind of absorb some of what you experienced.
Oh, yeah,
how is that?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I can't do it physically, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. So I said, we're going to take this road trip virtual. Here we go, like many of us. So I had many conversations with folks. I did a project with David Byrne from the Talking Heads called We Are Not Divided, and interviewed a bunch of people across, different divides. Some are from the Human Rights Campaign and some are from Focus on the Family, which are sort of at opposing viewpoints for LGBTQ plus legislation. Talked to this incredible individual who's also in my book, Rai Moran, who led the survivor statement storytelling for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. All kinds of, a group of nuns and a group of millennial seekers who were living in convents together, just like all of these really wonderful people. And many of those stories made it in the book. So, although the road trip, in my Prius didn't continue because of COVID, the story was still ever opening and unfolding. And I had a lot of interviews that continued.
And you're continuing to talk about it. So
yeah.
I have to ask you my first question then, because you're talking to a lot of different groups, a lot of different backgrounds. They don't always agree with you. Mm-hmm. So what goes through your mind 10 seconds before you speak to them on this topic, maybe before you dive into being curious or talking to someone who just sees things differently than you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And curiosity is a desire to understand. It's really, I want to know about this person, for instance, that's standing right in front of me. Like, what are they about? What are their stories? What are their insights? What are their values? How are we similar? How are we different? And the thing that I think about 10 seconds before I get into that conversation is don't fall into the trap of predatory curiosity. It's this idea that it looks like curiosity because you're asking questions, but there's some kind of agenda or ulterior motive underneath it, right? So sometimes we're like, I'm going to ask them these questions because then I'm going to gotcha. And then I'm going to tell them how my belief actually is the right belief and they're wrong. Or, we ask them a bunch of questions and then we're like, why aren't you going to ask me a question back? Like that, this is supposed to be like a conversation. You're not asking me any questions, right? In both of those cases, there's some kind of agenda or ulterior motive. True curiosity is not what a detective does, right? It's not what, it's not asking questions to try to arrive at some kind of, motive or answer. It's really, I don't know what's going to happen. It's maybe what being a podcast host is about. That's my assumption is you kind of go in, you ask these questions, the conversation unfolds, you hopefully learn a lot about each other. It's a delightful experience, sometimes a hard experience, but you walk away really understanding the person in front of you. That's what true curiosity is. So I just try to anchor on that and center on that and just focus on, I'm here to understand this person that's right in front of me.
So you're not so much thinking about what your agenda is. You're thinking about understanding who it is that you're interacting with.
Right, which is a hard practice because we live in a world where we want to be heard and seen, and that's important. And also, we have a direct and personal connection to many of the issues that we might have a different opinion or perspective on than the person that's in front of us. So they're saying things and we're like, ooh, we're like screaming in our, body, and we're like, oh, I don't know if that's true. We really want to, just continue to sort of like put our point of view up front, sort of, deconstruct their own point of view, show them why they're wrong or their thinking's inaccurate or why our views are better. And I get that impulse. I really do. And what happens when you do that is people go on the defensive and they start to feel like they're being attacked and they start to pull away, and it doesn't lead to a healthy and positive connection or a conversation that curiosity could actually offer you.
So why was this so important to you? I want to dial all the way back, and I'm curious about where you started this journey, before you actually got into the car and you drove, but that curiosity started way long ago. Where did it start for you?
Well, I mean, so there's two kind of answers for this. One is that we're all born with curiosity. The day we arrive into this beautiful, scary world, we are born with curiosity. And that's in part thanks to our ancestors. We needed someone in our group to be curious about, is there water, over that mountain? Can I eat this berry? What happens if I track this buffalo? Like that is what's helpful for us to survive, but also to learn. We needed curiosity to learn how to make tools, to explore environments, to build connections with the people around us. There's something called social curiosity that's about building relationships with our curiosity. So we know from the research that when you study infants, they look at novel stimuli for longer than known stimuli. So what that means is we're born with curiosity. We're not taught that. It's something that's in us. We also release dopamine when we're curious. So I call curiosity like the pleasure ride or the pleasurable experience. It's like having sex or eating like delicious and tasty food. I'm like, who doesn't want to do that? Getting curious is like a very delightful and enjoyable thing. So I just love doing delightful and enjoyable things and pleasurable things. So that's in part where it comes from. But there's also this purpose part of my curiosity, especially after 2016. But I think we still see it today with conflicts and the rise of different political sort of arguments in the arena that we operate in. But 2016 is when I personally really felt it with the presidential elections here in the United States. I mean, you really could not throw a pebble in any direction without landing into some kind of divisive, dehumanizing arguments and attacks from one group to the other on social media, in the news. I mean, you couldn't even go to a family reunion without having some kind of political blow up, because our families and our communities are so diverse and we vote in different ways. But I realize that it's about more than just politics, right? We are seeing the divide across faith, across where we stand on geopolitical issues, on, gender, on age, right? There's okay boomer, entitled millennial, it's pretty much in every societal, part of society that you could think of.
So you thought, what's going on here?
What's going on? And is this our future, y'all? I don't want to live in a world like this. I don't want the people who are coming up next to live in a world like this. We're not going to be able to actually be in connection to one another. That is really not only, sort of a positive relationship, but one where we actually value differences and perspectives and identities. I want to live in a world where you can have a different faith. You can come from a different race or background. You can have a different set of life experiences, and we can still come together and feel a sense of belonging. And then two, there's real problems, y'all, that we got to solve, right? There's a mental health epidemic, social isolation's on the rise. We have, lots of extremism, the decay of democracy. We have the climate crisis. You really can't you'd have a CVS receipt size list of issues that we need to solve. And that requires us to come together across our views, our parties, to actually meaningfully solve things. So that's what sort of drove me into it. I wanted to understand, how do we come back together? How do we form relationships? But how do we actually solve real problems that real people are facing? There's real suffering going on. Instead of fighting each other, is there a way that we can come together and actually solve those problems? Okay.
And you started that journey with being curious. You're saying that being curious is the beginning to solving some of that.
Yeah. I didn't know. I just was in order for me to understand if there's any ways that we can actually come back together and to heal across our division and to solve problems, I need to actually go out there and meet people who have different opinions than me, because I operated from my own stereotypes. I thought, for instance, Trump voters were uneducated or were from just rural parts of our community, or were just, all white people. Like, I didn't know, because I came from the San Francisco Bay Area and I just didn't have a lot of contact with people outside of these very divisive platforms like social media, to which, are based around algorithms that show us like the very most extreme versions of people and groups. I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to really just have conversations with people and say, here's what I've seen on the news, but I just want to just talk to you and really understand your story and really understand where you're coming from. And hopefully by me being curious, you'll be inspired to also hear about my story. And maybe it's the first time you've ever met someone who's, Asian American, or who's queer, or who, XYZ, who has a different view from you. That's, a Democrat who's not coming at you to like denounce you or attack you because of who you voted for in the presidential election. And I think that's where I realized we can start from to build this more healthy, these healthy relationships with one another.
So what did you find? You went into places that you'd never been before with people that had very different beliefs from you.
Yeah.
Start me off with, you left San Francisco in your car.
Yep. In my Prius, yeah.
In your Prius. You thought, I'm going to go where?
Very California cliche.
Yeah, very California cliche. Where'd you go first?
So, the big thing I had to realize is, okay, I'm living out of my car, so I need to switch up this. It's not a van life situation. I barely have height clearance in the Prius. So I took out the back seats, went to home. First thing I went to do is I went to Home Depot, and I like literally created a bed platform for the back of my Prius. But then, I was like, okay, I need to, shower in all these different places. So I got a Planet Fitness membership. And then you
got a what membership?
A Planet Fitness membership, because they're open 24/7. It's like a gym. You can walk in, you can get, go and shower. And then my very first place that I was heading to was to Colorado. And I was heading to a town called Colorado Springs. I've actually had friends who have gone to UCCS, which is, in Colorado Springs. But it's a really interesting town because it's, got the Air Force Academy. It's got, religious organizations like Focus on the Family. It's got a huge sort of Democratic presence, but also a huge Republican presence. So it's just a very, very dynamic place. And I had found on a website somewhere that there was a Republican meetup happening in Colorado Springs. So I just was like, I'm going to go there. I'm going to drive off in that direction, and I'm going to show up tomorrow at that meeting and see what happens.
And what happened?
So I got there. It was like a small room. I actually didn't write this in the book, but it was an interesting story because I got there. It was like maybe 20 people. I was like feeling really nervous before I opened the door to the meeting because I have nenever been to a Republican hangout or meetup of any kind. I was wondering if they were going to think I was like a spy or some kind of like, I don't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. And before I left on my trip, my friends had said, you should bring a gun, you should bring a knife, you should bring pepper spray, like you should protect yourself. Like you never know what someone's going to do to a person like you. You know what I mean? And that just like instilled this sense of fear and anxiety about my trip. I also had people who told me, you meeting with Republicans, you're platforming, all of these hateful things about, America. And like, do you really want to meet those people? And so I had also that in my head and I was like, oh gosh, like who are these people? Like, what is this going to be like? And I got in and it was just like, there was like one of those like coffee carafes and some like bottled water, it was like on a tablecloth and some fold out chairs and people were just kind of milling around. And I just like went up to the first person. She was a woman, probably like maybe, a little bit older than me. And I started asking her questions like, do you live here in Colorado Springs? Where are you coming from? And then she started asking me questions like, what part of town do you live in? I'm like, oh, actually, like I live in my car. I don't live in Colorado Springs. I told her a little bit about my journey. I said I was a progressive. And she was like, oh, my brother is actually gay and a progressive. And I was like, oh, wow, what's your relationship like? Can you tell me more about that? And we got into this really interesting conversation about how she just doesn't talk about politics with her brother anymore. She said, if we do, we're just not going to have a positive sibling relationship. And I just like learned about all the pain that she felt not being able to know things about what was going on in her brother's life, because she felt like because of politics, they just were missing this sibling connection that they grew up with. And she really longed for it. And she was like, I really miss those days. We like, could just like hang out as brother and sister and just like enjoy being with one another. But, we just every time we seem to talk about things, we just erupt in some kind of argument. And I think it was like, okay, this is like the first story of many, 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 many that I would hear on the road where people are feeling this sense of disconnection and despair and sadness and hopelessness in their lives because they don't have the tools to be able to talk to people who are different from them, even in their own families, who they grew up with their whole life, who are like the most connected DNA wise to anyone else in the world. And yet we were struggling to make these connections. So that's what I like focused that night on, was just like asking people if they knew of anyone who was Democratic, what was their connection. I think people were a little bit, they were like, what are you doing here? Like, this isn't a space that was designed for you, which makes sense. I did, I since then have, asked, people that are organizing these events, like, hey, this is who I am. Would you be interested in like, having me there? But, I do understand that there's suspicion that someone who is in the opposing party comes barging in, but largely it was actually a really positive experience.
So were they as scary as you expected? And was your fear based on truth?
No, they were not as scary as I thought they were going to be, or as what people told me they were going to be. I mean, this is such a trope because it's true that when you really get to know people, you start to see a lot of the common humanity and the common similarities that you do share. And I nuance this by saying it doesn't mean that, we shouldn't continue to speak against injustices or speak against hate or speak against, policies that are affecting real people. That's not what I'm talking about with curiosity. Curiosity doesn't mean consensus. I don't expect a Christian to really understand the humanity of someone who's Muslim and then convert or change their beliefs, right? Like, that's not what I'm saying here. It's really just about understanding someone else who might be different from you, while also like hopefully having the opportunity, if they ask you questions and are curious back towards you, a little bit about yourself. And it becomes this really beautiful story sharing and building of mutual understanding. And I walked away from that night being like a little bit more hopeful, just like, okay, can we do that? Like if what happened there, how are we able to talk and have these kinds of more positive conversations? How was I able to listen? I didn't disrupt their meeting. I just like listened and learned about what was important to them. I learned a lot from that. I felt my perspectives were shifting and changing. I no longer saw them as like this one-dimensional group of people. They were arguing with themselves about how to approach different pieces of policy or how to approach the upcoming election that was happening. And I was like, oh, wow, like we do that on the Democratic side too. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is so interesting. And so it just getting out there and being curious and coming into positive contact with people who were in a different group from me, helped me to transform my own beliefs and understandings of who they are. Yeah.
Were they as curious about you as you were about them?
Yeah. So not really, to be honest, in that particular case, because I didn't have the tools and the knowledge that I now have on how to really unlock that. And I think my missing piece was what I was saying earlier, where I came in wanting them to ask me questions. Like I went into those doors of that Republican meetup. I was like, I want them to ask all the questions, learn about my experience as a queer Asian American, and they need to ask me questions. And when they didn't, I got flustered or a little bit, agitated.
You had an agenda.
Yeah, I had an agenda. Exactly.
Right.
I was like, ooh, not, and then I would later find, and, looking back at that experience, that wasn't me being truly curious. Right. And the times when I was truly curious, like when that woman talked about her brother, I wasn't even thinking about me at that point. I was just really understanding her relationship. I was just so invested in her. And that was one of the most beautiful parts of that evening. Right. And I was like, wow, when I truly am just genuinely and open-heartedly interested in someone and their stories, magic can happen. It's almost like we forget about these divisions that we have, you know, and don't want to lean into arguments and fighting one another and taking each other down. We really just want to hear and understand one another. And hopefully by bridging that understanding and forming deeper relationships, we can start to move towards, you know, a society of more justice and more belonging, of, you know, more connection and less canceling.
What was your next stop or your next point of evolution on this trip?
I think like the big sort of next step from there, I mean, you know, it not perfectly chronological, but like the next step was like, I need to go to a bigger gathering. I need to go to where people from around the country are gathering, not just, you know, 20 people in a small sort of local election office. And so I went to a Trump rally in Minnesota, and that was just the production value. It was like literally going to the NBA finals or something. I mean, there were just, the parking lot was filled with a sea of red caps and hats and food trucks and merchandise and people yelling and screaming and cheering and huge jumbotrons with like Trump, you know, on it. And it was just like a very, very different environment. It's almost like when you go to a football arena, you know, and, you know, one team's on this side, the other team's on that side, and you can just feel, you know, not everyone's there for friendly rivalry. You know what I mean? Like, so you can feel the like energy. And I felt that at the Trump rally as well. So that was the next stop that I went to.
And how did you handle that? How were those conversations?
Yeah, I basically did the same thing. I went up into line. You know, obviously there wasn't anyone I could call to be like, hey, I'm showing up at this rally. Like I just showed up. And I was very honest about who I was. Hey, I'm a Democrat. I came from the Bay Area. I'm here to just really understand people, you know, why you're voting for Trump, who you are as a person. I don't want to just believe everything I hear from the news or from other people. And people really respected that. I got a lot of thank yous, actually, which was sort of not at all the two words I was expecting to hear at a Trump rally. From, you know, a lot of my sort of stereotypes and caricatures of who a Trump voter were challenged. I mean, I met people with advanced degrees. I met people who traveled the world and had humanitarian nonprofits. You know, I met people who, you know, really understood the work that I was trying to do to bridge the gap between faith communities and the LGBTQ community. I was like, what? Like, y'all are like actually like okay with the fact that I'm telling you I'm queer, you know? So I just started to see a more nuanced and a more complex view of who someone that voted for Trump was. And then we like went in line. It's very like Black Friday-esque. Like, I don't know if anyone's been to a rally who's listening in, but you're like standing in line for hours. People like literally have coolers and like lawn chairs, and they're like ditching that and their umbrellas on the side before you go into the arena, going through security. And then you walk into the arena and it's just like loud and there's signs everywhere and people are cheering and everyone's wearing red. And it's just a very intense situation. I sit down with some folks that I had just met, and we're watching, you know, all of these speakers come on, and then Trump finally comes on, and I'm just like feeling my body and I'm just exhausted. I'm like hearing the same things that I've heard Trump say over and over again. A lot of it very divisive, a lot of it really, activating me personally. And I was just like, I got to get out of here. So I did like the awkward squeeze and like left the arena. And there's this group of Trump voters who are also leaving as well. And I was like, wait, the person you came for is talking. Like, why are you leaving early? I don't understand. And they said, oh, traffic. You know, we got to get it in front of like all the parking. The parking garage is going to be ridiculous and we have to get out fast. And I was like, oh, I definitely know that. Going to festivals, get out early. And we walk out and there's a sea of counter protesters, and they're all just like cheering and making songs that I've, you know, singing songs that I know well because that's my ideological side. And this guy points at us and he calls us out and he yells, you know, fuck you, you racist, like get out of our city. Like it was just like a very, and it was just like,
which side was
the counter protesters pointed at me and this group of Trump voters. And they said, you know, fuck you, you racist, get out of our city. We're in Minneapolis. And in my head, I was like, bro, like I'm like so much more aligned to you ideologically, and you're just like, you don't know anything about me. You're like, you know, not a fucking single thing about me. And you're like calling me these things and telling me to get the fuck out of your city. And it's like reminding me of like, you know, as an Asian American, like, you know, we're often like told ching chong and like, what country are you from? Get out of our city, go back to your country. You know, it was just like, whoa. And I was just like realizing, and then I got curious about him and I was like, wow, he must be in so much pain. Like he must be, it's like seeing so much suffering or experiencing so much suffering that like that is his impulse, you know, to yell at a group of strangers. You know, I could have worked at the arena, like he didn't know, you know. Right. But yeah, so that it was just a very intense experience. Yeah.
So I'm really curious about that moment and what that did for you, because you thought you aligned with that side and not the side that you were in the rally with. How did that leave you feeling? Because he's supposed to be one of your people and supporting you, and now you're kind of stuck in the middle. Did it give you pause to think about the real divide, and that people are a lot? What did you think?
I love that question. I mean, like by that point, I had so much, I had big buff curiosity muscles. It's like a, like you go to the gym and you start with like the 2 or 5 pound dumbbells, and then you work your way up and you get stronger and stronger. So curiosity is the same. It's a practice. It's an exercise. The more you do it, the bigger your muscles get. So at that point, my muscles were pretty beefy, my curiosity muscles, but my immediate impulse was to getting curious about him, to be like, this guy doesn't know anything about me. Like, what the hell does he know? And then I realized, like, isn't that kind of what we all are doing? Where we're sort of, we get targeted for whatever reason that might not have anything to do with us. We're called a name, we're called a stereotype, a caricature, and then we immediately go on the offensive or the defensive, right? And we're like, my impulse was like, you don't know anything about me. Like, dude, I'm supposed to be closer to you. And I wanted to like argue with him, but I was also just so depleted of energy. Like I had nothing left in me. I just took it. And I turned to the people that I was leaving the arena with, and they were just, he was just like, I'm not a racist, and it was just like, it was such a microcosm of, I think, what's going on in society in general, where we're all just kind of like pointing fingers at one another, calling each other names, not really understanding one another, assuming that we know everything about someone because we have a single identity about them, whether it is you're gay, I know everything about you that I need to know, I know everything about you that I need to know, you're Republican, I know everything about you that I need to know. And we're not willing to turn towards each other with deep curiosity. But then when I got to my car, I started to think about like, God, like, what is that? What that guy must have gone through some stuff, like, and I wanted to like, I wish I had the energy to like ask him questions and to like, let him know why I was there, and to, have a deeper conversation with him, and maybe even have like brought us all together. I don't know. Maybe that's my like very like overtly optimistic viewpoint. But I think what was beautiful was, I when I gave myself some space, and because my curiosity muscles were a little bit beefed up, I was able to also see it from his perspective and like kind of take myself out of the picture, and, and really just want to understand where he was coming from, which I think would have de-escalated the situation and helped him to understand what was going on.
So how do you feel as you've gone through this? Do you feel that you're on a side? Do you feel, because it sounds to me like you went looking to find out what the other side looked like, and then you got out there and the other side kind of looked like the other side.
Yeah. I think that, what I realized is that, I still have my own beliefs. I still have my own viewpoints. I'm a fierce, believer that there are real policies that are being enacted that are affecting, the communities that I'm a part of, or the communities that I'm in solidarity with, that I see as like policies that are racist or anti-LGBTQ or, anti-immigrant or whatever it is. And those viewpoints might be different than the many people that I met who have a different political viewpoint than me. I think that is true. I didn't lose any parts of my viewpoints, as a result of going on this conversation or this journey. But what I did gain was I no longer dehumanize the other side. I no longer say, which is what I used to say, unfortunately, like, I mean, that's a bunch of uneducated people. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. It's the same thing that I've heard with vaccinations. It's the same thing I've heard with just like religion, with people who are, more progressive and unaffiliated. I mean, we do this so often where we just kind of like cast out an entire group. There's a crisis right now in Israel, Palestine, and I'm seeing the same thing that's happening. It's come lots of dehumanization, and, it's really dispiriting, I think, and it can make us feel really a sense of despair and hopelessness. But every time that I actually access my deep curiosity and I really think about what is the suffering or the story or the values or the beliefs that people have, and why, and who are their loved ones in their lives, and can you tell me more about that? And I don't want to just know your name. I want to know the story of your name and who named you. Can you tell me about them? it starts to combat all that fear and that anxiety and that despair and that hopelessness. And it makes sense because when you look at the research for something like end of life anxiety, they've shown that when you actually have curiosity towards the life you lived, your relationships, how do you want to die with dignity? What's the legacy that you're leaving for the next generation? That actually reduces your end of life anxiety. You talk to palliative care physicians and nurses, end of life doulas, they'll tell you that curiosity is a big part of supporting the person who is dying and their loved ones as well. And then you think about anything that we're fearful or anxious about, right? Curiosity is such a really remarkable tool to help us to heal. I talked to a trauma-informed therapist, Kevin Becker, and I put him in the book too, because he has such great things to say about this. He's worked with some of the biggest traumas you can imagine, natural disaster responses, folks who were affected by 9/11, first responders, families affected by school shootings. I mean, just like very traumatic situations. And what he told me is it's really, really, really hard to be curious when you're in a moment of trauma. It's extremely difficult. But paradoxically, curiosity is the barometer of healing. In other words, the only way that, people can move through their suffering is to look inward, to look outward at the world again, to be really curious, maybe about the divine and the beyond, whatever it is. But that curiosity is a way to unwind a lot of that fear and anxiety and what holds us back. And so, I see it as like, I don't want to bring a gun. I don't want to bring a knife. I don't want to bring pepper spray, but I was like armed with something else, which is something we're all born with, which is our curiosity.
Do you think someone who maybe isn't so curious or isn't curious enough can become more curious?
Yeah, I mean, it is a muscle, right? Like it is something that we can develop over time. There's, also research to show that when we model our curiosity, let's say for our children, it is more likely that they will improve their capacity for curiosity. So you can think about the benefits for this as an educator, or even as like a manager at work. If you want to create a more curious culture with your employees and teams, it starts with you modeling it. And the reason behind that is we know that curiosity is contagious. There's a phenomenon of the chameleon effect. There's we have mirror neurons, in our brain. We model our behaviors around the people that we are closest to or that we're in interaction with. And so when we are curious, it is more likely that other people are going to be curious too. And so that's something that I always give to folks because they, are going back to like Thanksgiving for family reunions or something. And they're like, I don't know, like that cousin, that uncle, whatever. They never extend curiosity towards me. So I've just like given up. But we have to just sort of believe that the more that we continue to practice it as, a continued daily exercise, right? That it is more likely that they will respond with curiosity in turn. But some people never do, never make the turn. They just continue to just be in their own world, hanging on to their own views, are never going to open up to what anyone else is saying. And that's the unfortunate truth and reality for some folks. So that's why I wrote a whole chapter on limits and boundaries. Curiosity has its limits, and we have to know what our boundaries are. Like at a certain point, like our relationships are going to become harmful. We have to like go no contact, and that's okay.
So talk a little bit about the steps to becoming more curious.
Yeah.
So if I want to be more curious daily, because you're saying that's a muscle that you've got to develop. I want to go and I want to lift a 2-pound weight, then I want to lift a 5, and I want to lift a 10.
Yep.
Walk me through how I would do that.
Yeah, totally. And so I developed a framework that's in the book called the DIVE model, DIVE. It's basically, you can think of it, it's an acronym, and each letter stands for one of the core muscles of deep curiosity. So D is to detach, which is to let go of your ABCs, assumptions, biases, and certainty. So this is the idea that we all come in with a ton of assumptions about other people based on their identities and based on their political beliefs or who they voted for, like everything we've been talking about. And we also have a desire for certainty, right? Like we want to know answers, and we prioritize answers over asking questions and like inquiry. And so we have to move away from this culture that says, you should say that you know everything because that's what makes you a good leader, when actually being a good leader is admitting that you sometimes don't know things, and that, we need to be intellectually humble. And we know from the research that that actually makes us more likable as a leader and makes us more valued and helps us with, creating cultures of collaboration. So letting go of our ABCs, that's the first step, detaching. When we sort of have less assumptions that we hold about others and we really interrupt our biases, we're going to be more likely to take in new information and new experiences and the new perspectives of other people. But if we're just full to the brim of our own stuff and we know everything, then we're never going to gain anything from our curiosity voyages. I as intend, which is to set the mindset and the setting for curiosity. So I talk about it in the book as like stretching. You need a stretch before you go run. You can't just like run out the door. You're going to get injured in the process. You need to warm up, right? You need to really, in athletics, they call it like mental rehearsing, right? You're going to imagine yourself running that marathon and like all the different hills and all the different turns that you're going to make. And that's going to help you to perform better. There's actually sports psychologists that have done research on mental rehearsal, and it helps you to, do free throws better or hit balls with the bat better, or helps you to run more effectively when you can actually plan out and imagine what that sensation is like, and you doing that well, like hitting a free throw. So the same is true for curiosity. If you are going to have a really hard conversation with your teenager at home that requires a lot of curiosity, or, you're a colleague at work, or your partner, your romantic partner, you shouldn't just go in without any preparation at all. Like, you should think about, where are we going to be? Like, what's the space going to be? Are we going to be in a busy, crowded, mall? Are we going to be in, our living room? Where will everyone feel psychologically safe to be able to actually share and to really listen to one another? And then what's the mindset you're coming in with? What questions are you going to be asking? Do you even have a list of questions that you're going to be asking your teen or your coworker? How are you actually going to come into that conversation? Are you going to set any ground rules, commitments? Are you going to invite them to also contribute ideas? So that's all about intent. It's about how do you create the setting and the mindset for curiosity. V is value, which is to see the dignity of every person you're being curious with, and that includes yourself. So again, if you are coming in dehumanizing another group of people because they stand on this side of the conflict, or they have, this belief, like, you are not going to get anywhere with curiosity. In fact, you're just going to continue to other them. You're going to call them the enemy, and, you're going to be more likely to actually not express compassion, but rather to want to spread hate and potentially violence towards that group of people, because it's easier for us to do that when we dehumanize them, because we can put them into this corner that says they're lesser than me and therefore they deserve this treatment of violence or being killed. And so we need to move away from that. We need to humanize every single person, even if it makes you uncomfortable because they have a very different viewpoint than you, or because of the identities that they have that you've never encountered. And then
before you get to E, and what if they are not valuing you? How do you handle that? So you're going in kind of peace and love and being curious and valuing that person. What if they don't value you back?
And that's, and also valuing is to also value yourself, right? And that's, a big part of, setting boundaries is to say, I don't feel like I'm being valued in this situation. I feel like I'm being dehumanized. Where is that coming from? Is there something that I said that is, causing me to feel that way? Am I misinterpreting this? And just really getting to the bottom of where that's coming from. And, when people are questioned about, them dehumanizing you, it really can lead to a really interesting place where you learn more about maybe this past harm or suffering that they've gone through, to like, or some kind of relationship dynamic that's happening or unfolding in that conversation that's making them feel like they need to exert, this sort of like othering mentality on you. Does that kind of answer your question, or do you have like other questions about value? I mean, is there like a certain scenario that comes to mind where you've been sort of devalued by someone? And
I'm thinking, when you have conflicts, global conflict, or you have even conflict between, different races and whatnot, and
Yep.
and you're coming in with curiosity and you're valuing that other side, but they are not valuing your side.
Yeah.
It's hard probably to remain steady and continue that
Absolutely.
curiosity when someone seems to not be open for it or not be
Yeah.
open back.
Totally. And then, you know, you don't always have to be curious, right? Like that's just, you know, it's okay to remove yourself from the conversation, right? Like I interviewed a daughter in a daughter mother, you know, scenario. She felt like she was raised in a very toxic parent sort of child dynamic. And she as a daughter, like never felt like she was getting anything positive from the relationship. In fact, she felt like she was getting harmed pretty much her whole entire life. And so she was being, you know, she was trying to value her mom, like see it from her perspective, be really curious with her. But her mom never extended that back. And she had to go no contact. She's like, this is harming my relationship with my husband, my children. You know, like I just will not stand for this anymore. But that did actually require her own curiosity towards herself. Like she had to be like, what do I really need? How's this impacting my relationships? You know, what's the harm that I'm experiencing in this relationship? So while curiosity towards her mother wasn't the solution, it was actually curiosity towards herself that allowed her to put up that boundary. It was really, really important for her. And that's the other piece that, you know, curiosity has multi directions. It's not just out towards the other people that we're being curious about, you know, that group over there. It's also, we need to get curious about ourselves, inwardly curious. And we also need to get curious about you know, what I call the beyond, which for some of us is the divine or God. And for others is, you know, our ancestors or, you know, those 7 generations from now, anything that's not in the physical realm. Mm-hmm. And so don't forget about the inward direction or the beyond direction. But yeah, you're right. Like it's definitely much harder to be curious when someone is actively dehumanizing you. I mean, I wrote about it in the book. I was in, you know, at this concert, and there was a group of guys that were, you know, being extremely homophobic. And, you know, I felt actually that my physical safety was, you know, in jeopardy. You know, they were yelling expletives and saying that, you know, they're going to fuck me up if like I keep kissing my partner, you know, just like really like, you know, and we were at a concert and other people were kissing each other, you know, it was like a romantic song, like, you know, like that's a normal thing. But instead of being like, hey, I want to get curious about where this is coming from, like, what's it, you know, they were drunk, they were intoxicated, you know, my then, you know, partner and I, and we're outnumbered. There's more of them. And it just wasn't like, this isn't the setting, you know, for us to be curious. Yeah. So, you know, we just moved, to a different seat. And that's sometimes what you have, whether it's no contact or moving away from the situation or saying like, not now, but maybe later. But I think we need to give each other enough time to actually hopefully see the light. You know, there were people when I came out in my family, and in my close loved ones, you know, who didn't understand me being gay. Like they really just didn't understand. They were scared for me. They thought it was a phase, whatever. And if I had just said, okay, well, you don't get it. I'm cutting you from my life. Like I'm no contact. Like you don't understand me. That's horrible. Then we never would have arrived at what happened months later, which is that they did some research. They grew ease with what was going on with, you know, like how they felt about me. And they learned to love me, and their views changed completely, you know? So that's all I'm saying is like, don't give up. Yeah. You know, don't give up on your people until you see that your boundaries being crossed. And then, you know, obviously like
you'll know.
Yeah.
The E in Dive.
The E is embrace, which is, you know, really just the idea that we have to welcome the hard times in our lives, right? That these challenging moments, like, you know, our own death or the death of a loved one, grieving, you know, moving after, you know, our house burns down in a fire or is flooded out by some, you know, natural disaster, which is becoming increasingly more common. You know, heartbreak or divorce, or even like positive things that are happening in our lives that are just really disrupting, like taking on a really new challenging job or welcoming a new child into the family or getting married, you know, like these are all big critical moments in our lives that mean a lot to us and also require our curiosity. And when we use our curiosity in these moments, it can be so, so helpful, right? When you're getting married, for instance, if you are curious about what you want and need out of this next chapter in your relationship, you know, you extend that same curiosity to your partner, to your collective loved ones, you start to have a much richer, relationship rather than if you're just incurious, right? Even 10 years down the line after that marriage, right? If you stay continually curious about your partner or your children, your loved ones, versus just like looking on your phone because you know everything you need to know about your partner because it's been 10 years, your relationship will benefit from that curiosity. As soon as you become incurious, your relationships, start to decay and people start to feel unheard and unseen and unvalued. And, there's probably a reason why the research says that when you're less curious, you are more likely to you have increased mortality. There's a reason why when you're more curious, your well-being improves, your relationship improves, your life satisfaction improves, your happiness levels improve. That is not just happening on an individual level, it's happening on an interpersonal level too. So that's is in those hard times, especially, like turn towards yourself, turn towards others, like be fiercely curious, because that's actually going to paradoxically unwind your anxiety, unwind your fear, and make you more equipped to better understand yourself and the people that you're going through that hard moment with. Right. So detach, intend, value, embrace. That's a dive motto. And that's a heartbeat of the book of Seek. And there's all these like fun practices in each of those muscles that, don't require you to like put on gym shorts to like do. So that's really fun.
There's lots of good stuff in there. I want to get to the title.
Yep.
And I want you to give us a little summary of what exactly that means. So Seek, how curiosity can transform your life and change the world.
Yeah.
How can it transform your life, if you can sum that up? And then how can it change the world?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. No one's actually to like deconstruct the subtitle and the title, which we think a lot about as authors. So
you got to listen to, you got to listen to 10 Seconds to Air more often. We do this all the time.
Yeah. Well, you're one of the only, I actually haven't heard another podcast do that. So that's your fresh original take. Well, I think, for the transform your life, just like I said, it is really a tool for us to, to go back to that story of that woman and her brother. We so often can feel sort of like we don't have the tools, or we feel a little helpless in our personal relationships or with the world and what's happening right now. I mean, it feels like every month there's something new, that a new war, a new divisive sort of break, a new ineffectiveness in Congress story that comes out, and it can feel really helpless. And so the way to transform your life is to recognize that this thing that you're born with, your curiosity, is this tool that you can actually use to better understand yourself, to heal, to heal from the past hurts that you've gone through, but also as a tool to connect with other people, whether that's your closest loved ones or strangers, or even people who you have very different views from or very different identities and life experiences from. It's this really, really powerful tool that can strengthen those relationships, that can help you to heal, that can help you to access more positive well-being, and, and effectively transform your own views. It's a force of connection and transformation. I think curiosity, people often think about, that's going to help me on trivia, at the next pub trivia night, or that's going to help me, like learn about this, like one topic about like horses or roller, whatever you're into, but it's about more than just an intellectual exercise. It's actually something that moves from the brain down into the heart. It's something that we can use to connect with ourselves and other people. And that's so transformational. And then the change the world part is, when we do that at scale in this era of incuriosity, that's what I call this era right now, the era of incuriosity, because we're unwilling to turn towards one another. Imagine a world where we are willing to do that, where people listen to the stories and the experiences of what it means to be experiencing homelessness right now, to be queer, to be an immigrant, to be a refugee, to have a mental health crisis and not have access to, the right resources. When we actually are able to listen to one another's stories and see the problems that we're facing, and then feel empathetic towards them and want to solve that, problem, because we are humans, and, for the most part, most of us care and have empathy, that's a really driving force for change. And I talk about in the book, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, which essentially was an act of curiosity. Rai Moran, who organized the survivor statements of Indigenous people, Métis, Inuit, and First Nations people in Canada who were affected by the residential school system, which is a horrible school system that led to the killing and the psychological warfare and the breaking up of Indigenous families in Canada. They set up all of these meetings in, hotel conference rooms and community centers and schools where non-Indigenous Canadians would be curious and would listen to the stories of Indigenous people, even though it was really scary and hard and uncomfortable. But there was so much learning, so much connection. Indigenous people felt valued and seen, and thus they were then able to work collectively, to make recommendations in civil society, in the government, in business, to actually repair and reconcile this harm, that recent harm. I mean, the last residential school closed in the 90s. I mean, this is like very recent. So, if, and then you look societally at other places, Rwanda after the war, and just all of these, South Africa after the apartheid, like these places where curiosity helps societies to move forward and to heal and to progress into something new, because in curiosity, as we're seeing in America right now, it's driving us in the wrong direction. That's what I see, and that's what I feel. And I think I'm definitely not alone in that, because everyone is feeling that.
You're saying, curiosity in America, there isn't enough, or you said it's
there isn't enough. Yeah, there's an era of incuriosity, and that's really tearing us down. It's causing us to tear each other apart. We're being that guy, that's like, fuck you, racist, get out of our city, right. and without really knowing people and their stories. And we have to just, recognize that, we have to, that this capacity that we all have, this curiosity, if done at scale at the society level, it really can change the world. And we've seen it happen in a number of different cases all around the world.
Scott, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to mention?
Oh my gosh. Well, now I'm just like so excited. Like, I want to know about you. And like, I'm so curious about like, what's your relationship to curiosity? And, like what, have you struggled with this kind of, divisiveness in your own life?
It's a great question. And as you are speaking, I'm putting myself in different scenarios and whatnot. I have to say the whole premise of the podcast for me was my curiosity, and then sharing that with the world and sharing that with other people, because in my other life and my work with individual people, I do communication coaching and host and executives coaching. I spend so much time talking to those people, and I have really interesting conversations. And I really felt that I wanted to share those conversations with everyone, because there's so much to be learned when I ask these questions. And I'm really genuinely curious about the people that I work with, because that's how I get to the bottom of kind of either what's holding them back or how they can launch forward and whatnot. And then the second part is, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, wow, the conflicts that you have, little conflicts that you have with people, often stem from lack of curiosity about the other person.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're talking about it on a global scale or whatever. But if we think about it individually, when we either don't like something that's happened, or have a disagreement with a family member, it's usually because we're not curious enough. Is what I'm hearing you say, and I'm believing it. I'm buying into it.
I mean, if we just do an audit of our own relationships and our own conflicts in our own lives, I mean, that's really at the heart of a lot of this. Is like, oh, wow, this person didn't have curiosity towards me, or I didn't have curiosity towards them. And that's what, led to it, kind of ending up in a blow up match,
escalating for no reason, because people make huge assumptions and they don't ask questions. They just decide they already know.
Yeah. And it's a human impulse, right? You're in that fight with your romantic partner. You're just like, no, I need to hear it. My side needs to be heard. You get defensive. You're like, that's not what I meant. But, so much could be just like proactively solved for, and just that your partner could feel so heard and so loved and so connected to you if you stay curious towards them. Right. And that's so beautiful. Yeah.
Scott, thank you so much for sharing your research, pushing us all to be more curious. Again, anything else that I didn't ask you? I mean, you and I can continue to talk, but I don't want to bore people with our, with your curiosity toward me.
Well, I don't think that's boring at all. And I think people listen because they love you. They want to learn more about you. And I know that you have that same curiosity towards your listeners. I mean, all I would say is like, would love to hear from everyone that's listening, your thoughts on the book. I really am the type of author that loves to respond to like direct messages and emails and stuff like that.
Okay.
So please, seek the book, seek how curiosity can transform your life and change the world. It's out everywhere where you get books. You can also go to seekthebook.com, and there's a bunch of bookselling lists from indies to like the big boxes. And if you read it and you have thoughts, shoot them at me. Send me a DM. Like I would love to hear from you and have a conversation with you. That's why I wanted to become an author, is like to have these kinds of conversations with people about topics that we collectively care about. So please reach out.
Okay. I will have all the links and all those assets in my show notes so that people can access them and they don't have to scribble them down right now. But reach out. Scott wants to hear from you. Thank you again, Scott.
Thanks so much. Really happy to be on the show.